Hi, I'm Sajit Greene, and this is Eric Myers, and together we are Soul Vision Consulting. Our website, if you'd like to visit us there, is www.soulvisionconsulting.com, and both of us are astrological counselors working here in Asheville, North Carolina. We also work with people over the phone and by Skype. Today we're going to be talking about Eric's newest book, and it's called Elements and Evolution, the Spiritual Landscape of Astrology. So today's taping will be about an introduction to the book, and we'll be following up with some more in-depth discussions of elements and evolution in some subsequent videos. So my first question for you, if you would help us understand why you chose that title, or what you mean by elements and evolution, and what do you mean by the spiritual landscape of astrology?
Sure. It's primarily a book on the elements, so earth, water, air, and fire are featured in a variety of different ways. I look at them from different angles, and I really expand the more conventional understandings of the four elements. My view on it is that they're actually a lot more comprehensive, just really embodying and illuminating nature itself in these various different ways. So there's two parts of the book. The first half of the book is called Cyclical Evolution, and this is looking at the elements as they play out within the grand evolutionary cycle, meaning Aries to Taurus to Gemini to Cancer, and around from houses 1 through 12, there's an evolutionary cycle. And each part of this cycle boils down to an elemental attunement. So it's looking at things more or less in this cyclical way of elements. Then the second half of the book looks at the elements in a much different way, and I title it Progressive Evolution, and it has to do with the evolution of consciousness. And the elements are looked at in a vertical dimension rather than a cyclical. And I'll get into that in a bit of the different parts of that vertical evolution. But together, in the synthesis at the end of the book, is a chapter called The Spiral Stairway, which is, if you think about the cycle going around, but we're actually elevating consciousness and evolving as we go, it forms this spiral stairway. And to me, that is the motion that we're doing in our evolutionary growth. We're taking these steps along the spiral stairway.
Right, so not just simply going around and around the wheel, and we don't really get anywhere.
Yeah.
We're progressing in two ways at the same time, both around and upwards.
Exactly. Many people do go around and around, and they chase their tail, and they repeat their lessons, and they get involved with maybe the same type of person that they did 5 other times, and they're not evolving, they're not learning the lesson. So that's always an option, is to chase your tail rather than, evolving up.
One of the concepts that you share in the book that's a new concept in the field of astrology about the elements is talking about the elements in terms of charged and neutral. Would you please say more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not certain that it's necessarily a new idea. I've heard other astrologers group earth and air together and water and fire together. I don't claim that that's new, but I haven't seen in any literature where it's developed as this, and it's given this much nuance and integrated within the whole understanding of the system. And basically, the idea is that if you look at the conventional understanding, is that earth and water are yin, and air and fire are yang, meaning physical and non-physical. And that is preserved, and that's valid, that's part of this book. But it's also looking at it from another angle as well, that earth and air can be looked at in what's widely called left brain functioning, which has to do with things that have to do with content, things that are more objective. And water and fire are looked at in more right brain ways, which has more to do with subjectivity and has more to do with process. And so the major difference between the charged and the neutral elements is that the neutral elements, which are more structural and more about content, do not have levels of intensity. For instance, 2 + 2 is 4 at the air level. It's information. Information doesn't have intensity unless we add it into it.
Right.
You get really passionate about some information, but that's your own charge. Same thing with the earth level, is that you have red and blue and couches and carpets, and they're not loaded with intensity unless we add that to it. It's just physical objects. In contrast, the charge elements have to do with process, levels of intensity, meaning that you can get very enthusiastic about something. You know, you love volleyball, or you're not so crazy about playing bridge, something like that. And that's fire. It's enthusiasm. It rises and falls in intensity. And then the water also rises and falls. You can have a lot of deep feelings about someone, or upset that has different levels of intensity. You also notice this in nature. You can have heat, rises and falls every day. Water can be more intense, like a tidal wave, or be still like a pond. Whereas air, space, is just a container, and physical earth is just a container as well, content and process.
And so with the neutral elements of air and earth, you can have more. You can have more in terms of quantity.
Right.
But the charge elements are more like qualitative.
Yes, exactly. And that's when we look at the aspectual interchanges between the air and earth signs and others with themselves and with the charge, is that's the variable, is how much do you have. You know, you can have a dictionary, which is several 100,000 words, or you can have, you know, a poem. A dictionary is not better than a poem, but it has more content. And so as you mentioned, the neutral elements have to do with content, and the charge more with the process, which goes with the intensity.
So you mentioned aspects. That was
Yes.
another thing I wanted to ask you about. In the first half of the book, you go into quite in depth about the aspects, and how does that relate to the elements?
Yeah. Within cyclical evolution, each stage or sign, and so I use each of the signs for a shorthand, but it's bigger than just the signs. It's a stage of the evolutionary cycle. So stage 1, which is cardinal fire, goes with Aries. So we look at Aries as a developmental or evolutionary process, and it has a relationship with all the other parts of the system. Every other part, it has an evolutionary relationship. The sign before and the sign after are part of this cyclical motion, and then with the sextile, the square, the trine, the quincunx, and the opposition, it makes these different aspects to all the other parts of the system. And what I found was that if we look at it as evolutionary programs or curriculums, so Aries has a curriculum with Gemini, with the sextile, with Cancer, with the square, Leo, with the trine, and so forth. And then I explain what's going on there with cardinal fire and, say, fixed fire with Leo. And so I look at the evolutionary relationship of all the various parts of the system to each other. And it's an elaborate curriculum, which is more or less the content. And then the second half with the progressive evolution is your process with it. What are you bringing to these curriculums, to these programs, to these lessons? What's your quality of consciousness? And so you must have that understanding that merges with the cyclical layout.
And the last thing I want to ask you about is the elemental level.
Yeah.
That seems like another concept that's new for astrology, talking about elements in terms of levels. Please say more about that.
Yeah, the conventional understanding of the elements, and I would say the conventional understanding of astrology, is that it's a symbolic system, which in my view would be at what I call the air level, the mental level, the symbolism and archetypes. That's valid, but my view is that's only part of the story. At the level of life is the water level, and that's what we're experiencing around us. We don't experience symbolism, but we do experience earth, water, air, and fire pretty much every day of our lives. And so at the water level, the elements come to vibrancy. They become dynamic. They become everything that you see and interact with. This is physical. This is a couch. This is earth. You drink water. Space is air, and fire is energy. And then so I look at the elements at each of these levels. So we have the earth level, which is complicated, but more or less it's the foundation that all of evolution sprouts from as we're evolving in consciousness. The water level is the level of life that sprouts from the more material. Then you have the air level, is the level of mind, and the fire level is the level of soul. And so body, heart, mind, soul. You might have heard that before. It's everywhere. It's maybe a new idea to astrology, but you really see the elemental levels in so many systems, so many understandings within so many cultures and time frames, back to the Hellenistic, all the way to Eastern religions, all the way to Jungian typologies, within the Kabbalah and with other mystical traditions. There's really a widespread consensus that reality functions at the physical, emotional, intellectual, or mental, and spiritual levels. And so I just bring that sweeping understanding of evolution to astrology. So that's and I'll say a lot more of that when we talk about its own little video. I'm going to go into a lot more depth because there is this liberating and manifesting channels within evolutionary ascension and descension that I'll go into greater depth later. But the elemental levels is pretty much making the elements more multidimensional than just simply symbolic within the mental or cognitive level.
And when you say that there's different levels to the elements, are you saying there's a hierarchy that, like, say, fire, because it's at the top level, is better than earth?
Now, it wouldn't be better. It's just more liberated. It's more free. Think of within the liberating channel, you start at the earth levels, at the bottom level, matter. Matter is contained. It's stuck. It doesn't, it's not moving. Water invites flow, movement. Water goes with emotion, energy in motion. Then the next level is the air level, which is spaciousness. It's even more open and unrestrained. And then the fire level is source, is energy. It's where we all originate from, that we're ascending towards realization. And so the evolutionary motion is that, as a child, you're oriented to the physical and to the emotional. And then you go to school and you're learning about the intellectual for many years. And then lots in the West think, that's all there is. You're done once you're enlightened, But I would think that enlightenment would be the fire level, light, awakening into soul realization or spirit. So the whole fire level has to do with it's the transpersonal level. It's just energy. It's the creativity and source that informs the other levels. And so it's not that fire would be better than earth. It would be that fire is more metaphysical than earth. And then on the manifesting, everything actually derives from the fire level, and it comes down into manifestation. So from that perspective, earth is what spirit is moving down towards. And so it has to do with separation into denser levels of reality, and then liberation into lighter levels back to the unity consciousness, source, oneness that we come from.
And to wrap up, I would just like to ask you who you think this book is for. Is this a beginner astrology book, or for the more advanced student or professional?
I think I tried to write it, and I had a great editor, Josh, thank you, Josh, tried to make it accessible to anyone interested in astrology at all. From the beginner to the seasoned professional. From what I've heard universally,